Hi, I'm Rashonda Kay. This is Reading with Rashonda. We are reading Behind the Scenes by Elizabeth Keckley, and we are on Chapter 7. I do not think we're going to make it all the way through Chapter 7 in one reading, but we'll see how it goes. Chapter 7, Washington in 1862 through 1863. In the summer of 1862, freedom began to flock into Washington from freedmen. In the summer of 1862, freedmen began to flock into Washington from Maryland and Virginia. They came with a great hope in their hearts and with all their worldly goods on their backs. Fresh from the bonds of slavery, fresh from the benighted regions of the plantation, they came to the capital looking for liberty, and many of them not knowing it when they found it. That's interesting. Looking for liberty and not knowing it when you find it. And I think that is probably because liberty doesn't look like we think it's going to look. And especially in the case of freed slaves, liberty didn't really look like what we think liberty is, right? There were still restrictions and still prejudices. But even in our time, liberty is work. And I think sometimes we forget that freedom is work. Freedom is hard won and it is hard kept. Many good friends reached forth kind hands, but the North was not warm and impulsive. For one kind word spoken, two harsh ones were uttered. There was something repelling in the atmosphere, and the bright, joyous dreams of freedom to the slave faded, were sadly altered in the presence of that stern, practical mother, reality. And a lot of people thought, oh, the North is going to be this utopia for Black people. It was not. It was not. Legally free, yes. Part of society, absolutely not. Instead of flowery paths, days of perpetual sunshine, and bowers hanging with golden fruit, the road was rugged and full of thorns, the sunshine was eclipsed by shadows, and the mute appeals for help too often were answered by cold neglect. Poor dusky children of slavery, men and women of my own race, the transition from slavery to freedom was too sudden for you. The bright dreams were too rudely dispelled. You were not prepared for the new life that opened before you, and the great masses of the North learned to look upon your helplessness with indifference, learned to speak of you as an idle, dependent race. Reason should have prompted kinder thoughts. Charity is ever kind. So really what she's saying here is that many people who got to freedom were not prepared to maintain that freedom. If, for example, for your entire life, you have had to work from sunup to sundown with no pay, you were tortured for all of the things that you did, one, you're going to walk through life kind of scared. I don't care who you are, there's going to be some fear in you. But also, if you have lived your entire life and you've never had to look for a house to live in, because, and this was one of the reasons people said slavery was good for Black people. We give them housing. Ma'am, sir, that's a horrible correlation. But what I'm saying here is if you do not know how to search for a house, and that's not something you've ever had to do, you're not going to know how to do it. That's all I'm getting at. So some of the things that you do in your everyday life, because you are free to do them, slaves have never done them. And so they didn't know how to do them. And so then people were like, well, look at them. They're dumb. They're lazy. No, they don't know how to do these things because they've never had to do them before and they've never had anybody teach them how to do it. This is a ridiculous catch-22. Catch-22 is you do something and then the effects of that something mean you have to do the something again, and you are just in this endless loop. The term comes from a book called Catch-22. It's a very good novel. It's weird and wacky and super interesting. So there's that. I will keep reading this book though. One fair summer evening, I was walking the streets of Washington, accompanied by a friend, when a band A friend. Hmm. Accompanied by a friend when a band of music was heard in the distance. We wondered what it could mean, and curiosity prompted us to find out its meaning. We quickened our steps and discovered that it came from the house of Mrs. Farnham. The yard was brilliantly lighted, ladies and gentlemen were moving about, and the band was playing some of its sweetest airs. We approached the sentinel on duty at the gate and asked what was going on. He told us that it was a festival given for the benefit of the sick and wounded soldiers in the city. This suggested an idea to me. If the white people can give festivals to raise funds for the relief of suffering soldiers, why should not the well to do colored people go to work to do something for the benefit of the suffering blacks? Okay. Um, there was a movement called the Uplift Movement where the well to do colored people went to work to do something for the benefit of the suffering blacks. I'm just using all the terminology that's right here that we just read. Were there complications and problems within the uplift movement? Absolutely. Absolutely. Anytime you have people who are swooping in as saviors of other people, whether or not they claim those people as part of their own, it's going to be fraught with difficulty, but also lots of good things happening. So there's that little tidbit there. I could not rest. The thought was ever present with me, and the next Sunday I made a suggestion in the colored church that a society of colored people be formed to labor for the benefit of the unfortunate freedmen. The idea proved popular, and in 2 weeks the Contraband Relief Association was organized with 40 working members. The Contraband Relief Association? Are the freed people contraband? Are we getting contraband to help them? Are we relieving contraband? I love the idea. Yes, help people, form organizations and committees to help people, and then actually do the work of helping people. But Contraband Relief Association? Okay. And they did it all in 2 weeks. It takes me forever to make anything happen. I feel like I'm not as industrious as they were back then, and let's be honest, I'm not. I'm trying though. I'm working on it. Every day I try to spend some time doing things that will forward the things that I want to do in life. I also spend time on Facebook and watching TV, not going to lie about that, but I am being more conscientious about what are the things that God has called me to do and what am I doing to actually do them. This is one of the things, so I am enjoying it very much, but just thinking, wow, in 2 weeks they got the whole Contraband Relief Association organized with 40 working members. Wow. They were like, boom, bam, boom. All right, I'm going to keep reading. In September of 1862, Mrs. Lincoln left Washington for New York and requested me to follow her in a few days and join her at the Metropolitan Hotel. That's interesting. I wonder why she couldn't just go with her. And I've got other questions about their relationship and Mrs. Keckley's role in the family, and she's clearly more than just a modiste, and like she has other clients, but that's okay. We're just going to keep reading. I was glad of the opportunity to do so, for I thought that in New York I would be able to do something in the interests of our society, the society being the Contraband Relief Association. Armed with credentials, I took the train for New York and went to the Metropolitan where Mrs. Lincoln had secured accommodations for me. The next morning, I told Mrs. Lincoln of my project, and she immediately headed my list with a subscription of $200. I circulated among the colored people and got them thoroughly interested in the subject when I was called to Boston by Mrs. Lincoln, who wished to visit her son Robert, attending college in that city. I met Mr. Wendell Phillips and other Boston philanthropists who gave me all the assistance in their power. We held a mass meeting at the Colored Baptist Church. Reverend Mr. Grimes in Boston raised a sum of money and organized there a branch society. Oh my gosh. So she is industrious. Wow. So she takes a train she takes a train to New York and she starts telling people about her plans. Okay, I rarely tell anybody about anything that I'm thinking, which may be one of my problems. That things I want to do don't launch because I am always hesitant to tell people about them. But she was like, "Look, Mrs. Lincoln, this is what I'm doing. I need your help." And Mrs. Lincoln was like, "Here's $200," which was not a small amount of money at the time. And then she went to met Mr. Wendell Phillips and other Boston philanthropists, and they started giving her money and assistance. Then she went to a church and raised money and organized a branch of the Contraband Relief Association there in Boston at this other church. Like, how long has she been there? A day and a half? She has gotten more done in a small amount of time than I feel like I've gotten done in the past 20 years. And way to go, Elizabeth Keckley. All right, let me keep reading. The society was organized by Mrs. Grimes, wife of the pastor, assisted by Mrs. Martin, wife of Reverend Stella Martin. Stella to me sounds like a woman's name, but all kinds of names have all kinds of things. And I'm going to assume that it's a man for two reasons. One, because this person has a wife and it was 1868, and not that people weren't in homosexual relationships, but they weren't really married and calling each other wives, were they? And also, this person is a reverend, and I know that women of the time were typically not able to call themselves reverend, and even now, some women are not able to call themselves reverend. So all this segue just because I read the name Stella Martin and thought that sounds like a woman. Okay, clearly my mind is in a lot of places today. Thanks for being on the ride with me. Let's keep reading. This branch of the Maine Society during the war was able to send us over 80 large boxes of goods contributed exclusively by the colored people of Boston. Returning to New York, we held a successful meeting at the Shiloh Church, Reverend Henry Highland Garnett, pastor. The Metropolitan Hotel, at that time as now, employed colored help. I suggested the object of my mission to Robert Thompson, steward of the hotel, who immediately raised quite a sum of money among the dining room waiters. Mr. Frederick Douglass contributed $200 besides lecturing for us. Other prominent colored men sent in liberal contributions. From England, a large quantity of stores was received, and there is a footnote. After from England, the footnote reads, the Sheffield Anti-Slavery Society of England contributed through Mr. Frederick Douglass to the Freedmen's Relief Association $24. Aberdeen Ladies Society, $40. Anti-Slavery Society of Edinburgh, Scotland, $48. Friends at Bristol, England, $176. Birmingham Negroes Friends Society, $50. Also received through Mr. Charles R. Douglass from the Birmingham Society, $33. They are getting money hand over fist for this. That is fantastic. Mrs. Lincoln made frequent contributions, as also did the president. In 1863, I was reelected president of the association, which office I continue to hold. So still in 1868, she was the president of the Contraband Relief Association. Nice. For 2 years after Willie's death, the White House was the scene of no fashionable display. The memory of the dead boy was duly respected. In some things, Mrs. Lincoln was an altered woman. I can only imagine that your child dying would alter you. Sometimes, when in her room with no one present but myself, the mere mention of Willie's name would excite her emotion, and any trifling memento that recalled him would move her to tears. She could not bear to look upon his picture, and after his death she never crossed the threshold of the guest's room in which he died, or the green room in which he was embalmed. And he was laid to rest in a crimson room. Cool. There was something supernatural in her dread of these things, and something that she could not explain. Tad's nature was the opposite of Willie's, and he was always regarded as his father's favorite child. His black eyes fairly sparkled with mischief. The war progressed. Fair fields had been stained with blood. Thousands of brave men had fallen, and thousands of eyes were weeping for the fallen at home. There were desolate hearthstones in the South as well as in the North, and as the people of my race watched the sanguinary struggle, the ebb and flow of the tide of battle, they lifted their faces Zionward as if they hoped to catch a glimpse of the promised land beyond the sulphurous clouds of smoke which shifted now and then but to reveal ghastly rows of new-made graves. the picture she is painting of the war are really something. Like desolate hearthstone. So saying people at home are sitting around their hearths and their loved ones aren't there because they're fighting the war and likely have died. People are turning toward heaven looking for some way to make sense of everything and a way to feel comforted beyond the sulfurous clouds of smoke. So muskets and such generated a ton of smoke. Um, there's a song, I think it's called 30 Point Buck. And anyway, it's a song about hunting and it has nothing to do with the Civil War. But there's a line in the song that they had been hunting and they're like after the smoke cleared. And so she's really referring here to the smoke that's generated by firing muskets and cannons, and that when the clouds of smoke shift, all you see are rows of new made graves. That is quite an image. Sometimes the very life of the nation seemed to tremble with the fierce shock of arms. In 1863, the Confederates were flushed with victory, and sometimes it looked as if the proud flag of the Union, the glorious old stars and stripes, must yield half its nationality to the tri-barred flag that floated grandly over long columns of gray. These were sad, anxious days to Mr. Lincoln, and those who saw the man in privacy only could tell how much he suffered. One day he came into the room where I was fitting a dress on Mrs. Lincoln. His step was slow and heavy, and his face sad. Like a tired child, he threw himself upon a sofa and shaded his eyes with his hands. He was a complete picture of dejection. Mrs. Lincoln, observing his troubled look, asked, "Where have you been, father?" "To the War Department," was the brief, almost sullen answer. "Any news?" "Yes, plenty of news, but no good news. It is dark, dark everywhere." He reached forth one of his long arms and took a small Bible from a stand near the head of the sofa, opened the pages of the Holy Book, and soon was absorbed in reading them. A quarter of an hour passed, and on glancing at the sofa, the face of the president seemed more cheerful. The dejected look was gone, and the countenance was lighted up with new resolution and hope. The change was so marked that I could not but wonder at it, and wonder led to the desire to know what book of the Bible afforded so much comfort to the reader. Making the search for a missing article an excuse, I walked gently around the sofa, and looking into the open book, I discovered that Mr. Lincoln was reading that divine comforter, Job. Job can be a very comforting book of the Bible, depending which part of Job you're reading, but all of it sure isn't. I have like an eyelash in my eye or a piece of hair or something. Mm. Um, but I stopped, not because I have this eyelash in my eye, but because I'm surprised that Mrs. Keckley had to make an excuse for walking gently around the sofa to look at the Bible that Mr. Lincoln was just looking at. It seems like she kind of has fair run of the place. And then this was a stark reminder to me, she's still a black woman. She's still the help. Let me continue. He read with Christian eagerness, and the courage and hope that he derived from the inspired pages made him a new man. I almost imagined that I could hear the Lord speaking to him from out the whirlwind of battle. "Gird up thy loins now like a man. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me." What a sublime picture was this! A ruler of a mighty nation going to the pages of the Bible with simple Christian earnestness for comfort and courage, and finding both in the darkest hours of a nation's calamity. Ponder it, O ye scoffers at God's holy word, and then hang your heads for very shame. She was like, those of you who think you can't get nothing from the Bible, look at President Lincoln. He went to the Bible, he got comfort and courage. How are we doing? I don't remember what time we started. I feel like we started 20 minutes ago. We have like 5.5 pages left. We're going to press on. Frequent letters were received warning Mr. Lincoln of assassination, but he never gave a second thought to the mysterious warnings. I can imagine all presidents get frequent warnings of assassinations, which is awful. The letters, however, sorely troubled his wife. I am sure they did. They would sorely trouble me. She seemed to read impending danger in every rustling leaf and every whisper of the wind. Where are you going now, father? She would say to him as she observed him putting on his overshoes and shawl. I am going over to the War Department, mother, to try and learn some news. But, father, you should not go out alone. You know you are surrounded with danger. All imagination. What does anyone want to harm me for? Don't worry about me, mother, as if I were a little child, for no one is going to molest me. And with a confident, unsuspecting air, he would close the door behind him, descend the stairs, and pass out to his lonely walk. For weeks, when trouble was anticipated, friends of the president would sleep in the White House to guard him from danger. Robert would come home every few months, bringing new joy to the family circle. Remember, Robert is their son. He's in Boston or New York, not D.C. He was very anxious to quit school and enter the army, but the move was sternly opposed by his mother. We have lost one son, and his loss is as much as I can bear, without being called upon to make another sacrifice, she would say when the subject was under discussion. But many a poor mother has given up all her sons, mildly suggested Mr. Lincoln, and our son is not more dear to us than the sons of other people are to their mothers. Wow. He is like, you can't keep him from going to war. Other mothers have let their sons go to war, and they don't love their kids any less than we love ours. I'm going to keep reading. That may be, but I cannot bear to have Robert exposed to danger. His services are not required in the field, and the sacrifice would be a needless one. The services of every man who loves his country are required in this war. You should take a liberal instead of a selfish view of the question, mother. Ooh. I see how you became president, Mr. Lincoln, because you are not afraid to go toe to toe with your wife, and let's be honest, most husbands should be afraid to go toe to toe with their wives. Although my husband's not afraid to go to toe to toe with me. I guess you shouldn't be. But ooh. Argument at last prevailed, and permission was granted Robert to enter the army. With the rank of captain and ADC, I don't know what that means, he went to the field and remained in the army till the close of the war. I well recollect a little incident that gave me a clearer insight into Robert's character. He was at home at the time when Tom Thumb combination. He was at home at the time when the Tom Thumb combination was at Washington. I'm assuming the Tom Thumb combination is some sort of entertainment. The marriage of little Hop o' My Thumb, Charles Stratton, to Miss Warren created no little excitement in the world, and the people of Washington participated in the general curiosity. Some of Mrs. Lincoln's friends made her believe that it was the duty of Mrs. Lincoln to show some attention to the remarkable dwarfs. Okay, I'm remembering it now. It was entertainment. Tom Thumb was a little person, and he toured doing whatever it was he did. And he was like this object of attention. He very objectified, but like, let me make a dime off of it. Tom Thumb had been caressed by royalty in the old world, and why should not the wife of the president of his native country smile upon him also? Verily, duty is one of the greatest bugbears in life. A hasty reception was arranged and cards of invitation issued. I had dressed Mrs. Lincoln, and she was ready to go below and receive her guests when Robert entered his mother's room. You are at leisure this afternoon, are you not, Robert? Yes, mother. Of course, then you will dress and come downstairs. No, mother. I do not propose to assist in entertaining Tom Thumb. My notions of duty, perhaps, are somewhat different from yours. And the way he can express his duty is also somewhat different. He is a man, and he could go to war. She is a woman and the wife of the president. Some of her duty will absolutely be to entertain. I'm not mad at Robert, but I'm also not mad at Mrs. Lincoln. Robert had a lofty soul, and he could not stoop to all the follies and absurdities of the ephemeral current of fashionable life. I'll be all right, y'all. Anyway, we got 2.5 pages left. I feel like this is a long episode. Mrs. Lincoln's love for her husband sometimes prompted her to act very strangely. She was extremely jealous of him, and if a lady desired to court her displeasure, she could select no surer way to do it than to pay marked attention to the president. These little jealous freaks. Oh my gosh. So we should read freaks here like fits, like she had fits of jealousy. I'm gonna try to get my life together. Oh, these little jealous freaks often were a source of perplexity to Mr. Lincoln. If it was a reception for which they were dressing, he would come into her room to conduct her downstairs, and while pulling on his gloves, ask, with a merry twinkle in his eyes, "Well, mother, who must I talk with tonight? Shall it be Mrs. D? That deceitful woman? No, you shall not listen to her flattery. Well, then, what do you say to Miss C? She is too young and handsome to practice deceit. Young and handsome, you call her? You should not judge beauty for me. No, she is in league with Mrs. D, and you shall not talk with her. Well, mother, I must talk with someone. Is there anyone that you do not object to?" Trying to button his glove with a mock expression of gravity. "I don't know as it is necessary that you should talk to anybody in particular. You know well enough, Mr. Lincoln, that I do not approve of your flirtations with silly women, just as if you were a beardless boy fresh from school." "But, mother, I insist that I must talk with somebody. I can't stand around like a simpleton and say nothing. If you will not tell me who I may talk with, please tell me who I may not talk with. There is Mrs. D and Miss C in particular. I detest them both. Mrs. B also will come around you, but you need not listen to her flattery. These are the ones in particular." "Very well, mother. Now that we have settled the question to your satisfaction, we will go downstairs." And always with stately dignity, he proffered his arm and led the way. So that was chapter 7 of Behind the Scenes by Elizabeth Keckley. I'm Rashonda Cade, and this is Reading with Rashonda.